When Julius Caesar was granted command in Gaul in 58 BCE, he stepped into a vast land of loosely bound tribes, overlapping interests, and the persistent fear of migration waves and Germanic incursions across the Rhine. His official reason was to protect the Roman province of Gallia Narbonensis and Rome's Aeduan allies amid spreading unrest. His deeper motive was military glory and the political capital that victories would yield in Rome. Thus began the Gallic Wars, a campaign from 58 to 50 BCE that would stamp itself on the history of Rome and of Europe. The first spark was the mass migration of the Helvetii. After the failed plot of their noble Vercingetorix, they resolved to abandon their Alpine homeland and move west. Caesar blocked them at the Saône, crushed a segment of their column caught mid-crossing, then brought them to battle near Bibracte. The Helvetii, fierce on horseback yet short of supplies, met legions whose discipline, deep formations, and heavy pila were engineered to break shields and lines. The fight turned when Roman infantry closed. Pilum volleys shattered the Helvetian frontage, and the legions pressed them down the slopes. After hours of attrition, the Helvetii, exhausted and hungry, sued for terms. An embassy led by Divico reminded Caesar that Romans had once fallen to the Tigerini, but this time they were compelled to return to their lands under Roman conditions. The victory solidified Caesar's reputation and opened the path for even deeper intervention in Gallic politics. A greater menace soon loomed. Ariovistus, king of the Suebi, had led Germanic tribes across the Rhine and was browbeating the Aedui, Rome's allies. Caesar marched to Alsace, parley failed, and the dispute became war. On the plains near the Vosges, he drew up his legions in depth, blunting Germanic cavalry with dense ranks of infantry and the mobility of the manipular cohorts. The first Germanic charge struck like a hammer, their long shields and heavy spears forcing a Roman wing to give ground. But the centurions held the line, reserves surged into the breach, and Caesar's counterstroke folded Ariovistus' spearhead. Panic rippled. Many fled toward the river and drowned. A crushing threat to Rome's northeastern frontier was snuffed out. In 57 BCE, Caesar turned north against the Belgae. After crossing the Ain and beating back several tribes, he faced the Nervii on the Sabis, commonly identified with the Samber. It was one of his most perilous hours. The Nervii sprang a masterful ambush while the Romans were laying out their camp, rushing the gaps between marching columns and hurling the legions into sudden, close-quarters combat. Standards wavered, cohorts buckled, and several eagles were nearly taken. Caesar seized a shield, rallied the reserves by hand, and the centurions died holding the line. On the flank, Titus Labienus stormed the enemy camp and pivoted into a pincer that relieved the pressure. By nightfall, the Nervii were shattered. Legend of the legion's iron resolve spread across Gaul. In 56 BCE, the war shifted to the sea. The Veneti of Armorica, Brittany, masters of coastal trade, had seized Roman envoys. Caesar ordered a fleet and placed Decimus Brutus in command. In the decisive battle, Romans used hooks to slash the rigging of Venetic ships, tearing down their great sails and robbing them of the wind. With the enemy immobilized, Roman marines swarmed aboard and won at sword's reach. The Veneti capitulated. Their leaders suffered harsh punishment, and maritime routes were bent to Roman order. The years 55-54 BCE brought audacity. Caesar beat the Usipetes and Tencteri, then threw a timber bridge over the Rhine, a feat of engineering meant as naked demonstration, before embarking on 2 risky expeditions to Britannia. The landings were precarious, storms wrecked ships, cavalry reinforcements missed their window. Caesar fought coalitions under Cassivellaunus, forced a crossing of the Thames despite sharpened stakes in the riverbed, then withdrew with winter closing and supply lines stretched thin. But Gaul itself was about to detonate. In the winter of 54-53, Ambiorix of the Eburones duped Roman commanders Sabinus and Cotta into abandoning their camp and annihilated them in an ambush. He then besieged Quintus Tullius Cicero's camp. Caesar marched at breakneck speed, lifted the siege, and unleashed a ruthless devastation of Eburonian lands. Granaries burned, foraging parties hunted, to deter imitators. The climax came in 52 BCE. Vercingetorix, an Arvernian noble, forged an uncommon unity among tribes and adopted a strategy of total war. Scorched earth to starve Roman columns, raised barns, and slaughtered herds to deny forage. Caesar chased him and suffered a rare setback at Gergovia, high ground, a supportive populace, and a misjudged assault bled the legions badly. For a moment the wind seemed to shift. Caesar pivoted, called in his dispersed legions, relied on Labienus to contain the Parisii in the north, and hounded Vercingetorix into the hilltop town of Alesia. The siege of Alesia showcased Roman engineering at its zenith. Caesar ringed the town with two lines, an inner circumvallation to trap Vercingetorix and an outer contravallation against relief forces. Between them yawned ditches and flooded trenches. Fields bristled with concealed pits, the Lilia, palisade stakes, towers at intervals, communication roads snaking for miles. Inside, Vercingetorix rationed food, expelled civilians to save supplies, and sent signals for relief. Outside, a massive Gallic army converged, launching relentless day and night assaults, probing for the thinnest seam. Towers burned under arrow storms, sappers clawed at ramparts. Caesar's Germanic cavalry fought savage, swirling actions over broken ground. In the final night's crisis, the relief host struck a low ridge where Roman lines were stretched. Caesar, in his scarlet commander's cloak, galloped to the breach, committed his last heavy infantry, and unleashed a cavalry wheel into the attacker's flank. The pincer snapped shut. The relief army broke. At dawn, Vercingetorix rode out and laid his arms at Caesar's feet. Alesia extinguished the last real hope for a united, independent Gaul. Even then, embers smoldered. In 51 BCE, holdouts like Uxellodunum clung to mountain redoubts. Caesar refused to squander men in frontal assaults. Instead, his engineers tunneled to cut the fort's spring. Water is a fortress's heartbeat, and the garrison yielded. Severe penalties fell on those who had borne arms, a calculated warning. By 50 BCE, Gaul was largely pacified. Roads and bridges laced the land, winter quarters dotted the map. Tribes that surrendered kept limited autonomy, paid tribute, furnished auxiliaries, and felt Roman law seep into everyday life. The central figure on the Roman side was Julius Caesar, ruthless when necessary, exquisitely practical, a field commander of rare nerve, and an unmatched propagandist who framed events in his commentaries as necessary and just. Around him stood gifted lieutenants, Titus Labienus, so often the balance in hard fighting, Quintus Tullius Cicero, unbreakable in defense, Publius Crassus and Decimus Brutus, decisive in key thrusts, and later Marcus Antonius. Facing them, each region yielded its champions. Orgetorix's people in their search for new land, Ariovistus, the face of the Germanic tide, Ambiorix, master of deception and guerrilla stroke, Vercingetorix, the rare standard-bearer of Gallic unity, Cassivellaunus across the channel, and within the Aedui, the pro-Roman Diviciacus, at odds with his anti-Roman brother Dumnorix. Together they form a many-voiced portrait of a continent in transition. Rome's stated cause was frontier security and the protection of allies. Inseparable from it was Caesar's personal ambition. Victory meant money, loot, loyal soldiers, and a halo that made opponents in Rome hesitate. Most of the story, and its outcome, came down to the Roman edge in discipline and engineering, the legion's drill, the science of camps, lines, bridges, siege towers, and logistics. Against the Helvetii at Bibracte, the Germans near the Vosges, the Nervii on the Sabis, the Veneti at sea, Ambiorix in the hedgerows, and above all, Vercingetorix at Alesia. Caesar fused terrain, weather, technology, and training into leverage, and broke his enemies with it. When the smoke cleared, Roman soldiers celebrated in their fashion. Secure camps razed, spoils divided, rites of thanksgiving paid to the gods, and stories of valor traded in firelight. In Rome, years later, Caesar held a splendid triumph. Vercingetorix, emblem of Gallic resistance, was displayed and then executed. Gaul slipped into Roman order, and from that order grew roads, towns, law, trade, and the seeds of Latinization that would one day help shape France. It was a brutal, grinding war, part tactical textbook of the legionary system, part geopolitical pivot, and it laid bare a hard truth of history. When political will meets the right military instrument, and a story is told persuasively, the map of an entire continent can change its color.